Hey, everybody. Good evening. This is your host, Nevin Gusak of the Populist Patriot. I'm back. I'm on a bit of a roll with all of these uh, videos that I'm doing right now. And I want to welcome you to another live stream. I'm probably going to make this fairly short. I wanted to talk about President Joe Biden's State of the Union speech and a couple of remarks about some of the news I've been hearing about energy policy. When I was watching Joe Biden's State of the Union speech, parts of it, I guess what we have to do is dissect, like every American president and virtually every American politician, between the rhetoric versus the reality. Joe Biden obviously said on the surface the right things about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I think there are definitely steps in the right direction. It sounds like they are banning the importation of oil and gas from Russia. And of course, my question always is, or my comment is why in the hell are we importing energy as well as other vital metals and manufactured goods such as steel from the Russian Federation, or in cases like China or Vietnam or Saudi Arabia? Why are we relying on geopolitical enemies and serial human rights violators, barbaric governments, for products which sustain our economy? Doesn't make sense. Frederick Bastiat was full of crap when he said, well, if goods don't cross borders, armies will. Well, guess what? France and Germany were close trade partners. The Third Republic of France and National Socialist Germany were close trade partners, and they came to blows in 1939 and 1940. Trade didn't tame the Third Reich and make a jackal into a pussycat. And now look what we have of Russia. Obama, Hillary Clinton, virtually the entire Republican Senate and Congress, all the Republican senators and most of your Tea Party heroes, your Tea Party patriots, and many of the Democrats in both houses voted to give Vladimir Putin permanent normal trade relations. And it was President Obama that signed the New START treaty with Putin's dictatorship, thinking that somehow Russia, which always violated every single arms control deal that's ever existed — just read the defector literature from Soviet military officers and policymakers that fled to the West, from Kenatyan Alibekov, or Ken Alibek, author of Biohazard, to name one example. I mean, just take a look at it. Or Arnold Beichmann of the Hoover Institution wrote an excellent book about how the Soviets violated numerous treaties, and the Russians have done the same thing too. So yet we're trading with a country that supports our enemies, is an enemy, and now we potentially could be close to nuclear conflict and continued in massive cyber attacks. In fact, Russian cyber attacks against the United States, which has always existed, has stepped up 800%. So President Biden has taken some steps that belatedly are tough on Russia. But getting back to other parts of the State of the Union, of course, what would I do with Russia? I would, of course, as I mentioned, I would tiptoe very carefully around not overly provoking Russia. I would not admit Ukraine into NATO, because Putin is looking for every excuse in the book to attack the United States. We have to be careful not to poke the bear in the nose. However, what we need to do as a country is not only do we need to embark on national unity, we need strong central policies to reindustrialize the United States, modernize our strategic nuclear force, expand our Navy, create actually a national industrial production base that will be able to assist the U.S. military in prosecuting, God forbid, a prolonged war. We need to expose the supporters of Russia and China, their American collaborators in the United States, through congressional investigations and intelligence collection, and publicize these results to the American public. And that is going to have to become through government counter propaganda measures. Yes, the federal government, a new nationalist government, should have at least a news channel and a radio station that will beam its point of view to the American people in this marketplace of information. I know this is controversial, and I know the libertarians and a lot of the conservatives and even people on the left would not like this. Generally speaking, not all, but many on the left do not like the strong national security state. And people on the right, and the neoliberal Reagan right, they don't like the idea of a strong central government. So, but my priority is the survival of the nation above everything else. Biden said a lot of wonderful things, lofty rhetoric about the PRO Act, which will, of course, joining the unions, joining and organizing labor unions to make it easier, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, infrastructure programs, new jobs, all the rest of it. Sounds great on paper, but the reality is, president, he has shown no leadership to be a populist. He hasn't exerted real pressure on Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema. I mean, Kyrsten Sinema was for lower prescription drugs, and then mysteriously she gets $750,000 from pharmaceutical companies into her campaign coffers, and all of a sudden, she is not for lower prescription drugs. Government policies to lower prescription drugs. And then Joe Manchin, well, I mean, look at his daughter's involvement with the opioid industry and how he's taken tons of corporate money. I mean, the guy is not a real New Deal populist Democrat. I mean, the guy should join the most anti-labor and pro-big business Republicans at this rate. I mean, he should just leave the party already, frankly. And Biden has done nothing. Biden's like MIA. He calls Joe Manchin JoJo, for example. I mean, this is not leadership. This is not what FDR or Teddy Roosevelt would have done, or even some of the early founders and whatnot. Absolutely nothing. So Joe Biden is an empty suit. And what we're getting is a repetition of Obama, where he had a populist mandate in 2008, 2009, and he squandered it. Could have re-regulated Wall Street, could have embarked on a program of economic nationalism. I mean, Joe Biden, talked about Buy America. He's totally right on that. But the guy has no history of supporting economic nationalism. His votes in the U.S. Senate for decades, he's a permanent fixture in the U.S., or was a permanent fixture in the U.S. Senate. And Joe Biden voted for NAFTA, voted for permanent normal trade relations with the People's Republic of China. Yes, Red China. On this show, we call him Red China, Red Communist China. And Joe Biden, when he was vice president, was, of course, all for Obama's giving permanent normal trade relations to Putin's Russia. So this guy wouldn't know Buy America if it bopped him on the nose. Again, empty suit, empty rhetoric, all lofty. You got to look at the rhetoric versus the reality. And the reality of Joe Biden, people on his supporters on the left, supposed left, were saying, well, he's going to be a new FDR. He's going to be a populist. Well, bullshit. Guy ain't no populist. You look at his record, there's nothing transformative. You take a look at gas prices are going up and up and up and up. Today, I paid almost $50 down here in Lauderhill, Florida, for a full tank of gas. Okay? Food prices are going up. Not that they were cheap for the past 30 to 40 some odd years. Wages have not caught up with the prices of goods and services and rent and housing and all sorts of other basic expenses. It just hasn't happened. It hasn't caught up with inflation. Supposedly cheap goods from abroad were supposed to be anti-inflationary. Free trade was supposed to cut down on inflation. A lot of good that's done, right? So take a look at that. Just Biden's been a disaster. Biden, initially was all for one of the good things that Trump did was really go against Germany's building of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which would have increased Germany's dependence on Russian gas. Now, Biden thankfully has swayed Germany to put a halt on Nord Stream 2, but why leave Nord Stream 1 open? We shouldn't. Now, with Ukraine, real short, I think we need to give full diplomatic support on the international arena, including the United Nations and the EU and other forums, to bolster Ukraine's image. We need to continue to do that. We need to pump in defensive weapons to Ukraine. We need to also supply them without overly compromising our sovereignty, economic support too as well. So we need to do that with Ukraine. But should we commit troops or bombers, American Air Force bombers and troops into Ukraine against the Russians and their allies? Absolutely not. We don't have the industrial base and the ability to retool at the snap of our finger our economy to war. We simply don't have the national production base. And I am very fearful if we think that we are 6 feet tall and rootin' and tootin' and we're Americans and we're superior. Well, I got to tell you, we're a colossus with a feet of clay. There are a lot of problems in this country. And militarily, yes, we have high tech with our aircraft, our naval vessels, but let me tell you something, we don't have the national production base. And we see how supply chains from abroad, if they break down, they have problems, then our economy starts to suffer. And that's, of course, how this inflation is starting. While, of course, American companies are boasting of record profits. So figure that out. So, and the jobs that are being created are not jobs for living wages. I mean, every single American president since at least Ronald Reagan, they brag about all these new jobs that are created. But more often than not, these are jobs, and the majority of these jobs are created in the service sector, which tends to be lower paying and minimal to no benefits. Not exactly family supporting jobs. Biden talked about the fact that he is for capitalism. That's great and fine. But he represents, when you look at his voting record, Wall Street capitalism. He doesn't really have a history of really representing and really being forcefully for the American small business and American manufacturers of differing sizes. I mean, for God's sakes, Senator Biden had the name Senator credit card of the senator for MBNA. It's all documented. Joe Biden is an opportunist politician. That's what he is. And he's going to say the right things and pretend to be a New Deal populist and an economic nationalist to solidify or try to solidify support amongst the Democratic grassroots base, including the populist voter. He says that the country is more united than ever. I beg to differ. The political divides in this country are very intense. And really, ever since the 1960s, starting in the mid to late 1960s onwards, this country has become steadily more and more and more divided to the point where it's reached both houses of Congress. Political partisanship has deepened. there is a chasm between the politicians and the quote unquote 1% corporate globalists and their political lickspittles on the one side and the rest of us of all classes on the other side. Things have deepened tremendously. And this is why America needs a new alternative of radical civic nationalism, that's my term, and a healthy, rational populism to unify this country together. Joe Biden is not going to cut it. Ted Cruz is not going to cut it. Donald Trump, and I was a Donald Trump supporter, is just not going to cut it. So, Joe Biden's State of the Union sounds great, the rhetoric, much of it. But a lot of it says blah, 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 blah. It's just empty rhetoric, because when you look at the reality is different. There have been no transformative structural changes. And now, while Biden is in the process, it seems, of banning imports of Russian oil and gas, which I, of course, support, instead, to make up for the lost Russian oil imports, American diplomats and negotiators are talking to the Venezuelans, the Saudi Arabians, and the Iranians to make up for that lost Russian oil. But the fact of the matter is number one, Venezuela and Iran are allies of the Russians and enemies of the United States. So we're basically going to subsidize two strong, staunch allies of the Russians and the Chinese, and then we're going to continue dealing with this serial human rights violator, the Islamic theocracy in Saudi Arabia. Real brilliant, Biden. Continuing this let's play to try and wean Venezuela away from Russia. That's the plan. It's nonsense. We try to wean China away from the Soviet Union. That didn't really work well. China mended its fences with the Russians and even maintained covert relations during the so-called Sino-Soviet split. So now, what's the price? What's the result of trying to wean China away from the Soviet Union? Now we built a massive geopolitical enemy that has worked hand in glove with American multinationals to steal American industry and steal American jobs, amongst many other things. Brilliant. We did the same thing in the 1980s with Saddam Hussein, while he continued to curse America behind its back and maintain strong alliances with the communist world. So this notion that we can just wean these countries away, no. Venezuela and Iran, as long as they're governed by anti-American political forces, they're not going to be weaned away. They happily export the oil to the United States, and they're going to collect the American dollars, the hard currencies, which will keep their dictatorships afloat. And therefore, Russia will continue to have beachheads in Latin America and in the Middle East. Thank you, Joe Biden. Great job. Okay? Great job. Now, the other thing is, in this, of course, the conservatives, the self-proclaimed, quote, admirers of energy independence, they won't tell you, and Joe Biden won't tell you either. But America is a massive exporter, the top exporter of oil. Why are we exporting oil to other countries and importing oil from other countries? We should consume our own oil and consume our own gas and export the excess product overseas after we fully consume all energy sources. And by the way, I am not against fossil fuels, but I am also very strongly open to wind, solar, safe nuclear energy, and also bioconversion. Yes, burning garbage to generate electricity. Covanta Energy, which is a company they have down here in Doral, which is in Miami-Dade County. They have a waste to energy plant, bioconversion plant. We should do that. We got to have a national program where we can work and, even if need be, discipline private enterprise and give them the incentives, the carrot and the stick, to head in that direction. This is where there needs to be some adjustments into the relations between what I hope will be a nationalist populist government, federal government, and that of the large corporate private sector, where the government is going to have to say, look, we're going to have to set down general guidelines. And I know there was a comment by a commenter. Thank you for listening. I forget the person's name. He posted in my last live stream. I appreciate you listening, but I lost him because he didn't like that I pined for big government. Well, I'm sorry. Thanks for listening. You can continue to listen and comment, but this is a populist nationalist program. I am not a conservative. Okay? I am no longer a Reaganite. So let me make that clear. Because I'm anti-communist, because I'm against fascism and National Socialism and Islamic theocracy, doesn't mean I immediately embrace libertarianism. Just because you're an anti-communist and against socialism as properly defined doesn't mean that one should automatically embrace libertarianism and so-called small government. Because what does small government really mean? It means that you allow big business to do whatever the hell it wants. That's really what it comes down to. That's what, when people hear small government, when a populist hears the term small government, that's what it means to us. It means big business can do whatever they want, ride roughshod over national security, over the consumer, over the working class, the middle class, and small and medium-sized businesses. Okay, so the bottom line is we should not be importing oil from Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Iran, any country that is either a geopolitical enemy of the United States or a massive serial barbaric human rights abusers like Saudi Arabia. No more. So what should we do with energy policy? Again, we need to consume our own oil, our own gas, and whatever's left over, then we export it to friendly countries and neutral countries. We don't export our oil to enemy countries. We don't export our oil to serial human rights violators. And that's the bottom line. And that includes exporting energy sources to countries under threat by the Russians or the Chinese or their satraps or allies throughout the world. I'm just going to wait I don't see too many comments tonight. I guess everybody's either asleep, they're busy. Just going to wait a few more moments for a comment to pop up. Last I heard, as I'm sure you all know, the Chechens, the Chechen Republic, which is governed by a real nut job, I forget the man's name, a bit of a warlord, militaristic character, if you will, a real thug, a real corrupt thug, and an ally of Putin. They're sending fighters against the Ukrainian forces, and they are acting incredibly brutal. In fact, I have a source, a friend of mine, who knows Americans who have fought alongside the Ukrainian side who just returned. And apparently the Chechen soldiers that were killed were found with bags with human fingers inside. This is what we're dealing with. The Belarusians. Belarus is basically an unreconstructed communist state. Its president dictator, Lukashenko, has said that he's for market socialism and against wild capitalism. One magazine article, journal article, called it the Cuba of Europe. They have all the communist symbols. The economy is state-owned or state-controlled. They have strategic alliances with the Russians, with the Venezuelans. They are a mass arms exporter, including to hostile regimes and serial human rights violators. They have committed their support to Vladimir Putin's effort to reconquer Ukraine and to shore up the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. We also take a look. We know that other allies of the Russians have backed Vladimir Putin. I've talked about that with my guest interview conversation, J.R. Nyquist. So we just have to remain prepared. We have to follow the news as best as we can, start stocking up on food and other tools to protect yourself and your family, medicine, basic medicines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nope, still no comments. I saw one or two people watching, but then I guess they logged off. I feel like saying anyone, or is that movie Ferris Bueller, and they would say Bueller, Bueller, Fry, Fry. Do you remember that? Ben Stein saying that. Oh, I got one like. Thank you. And it looks like we got one listener. Very cool. Thank you. Thank you for the like and thank you for listening. Appreciate it. Give it another minute and I will end the stream. But I'm going to be doing more of these, I think, as news develops. But I need an event about the Biden State of the Union address. I mean, that just really infuriated me. It's just a lot of blah, blah, blah. And the sad thing is that people on the left and the right, populists on both sides of the equation, can see right through it. Not that a Republican victory will do anything. I mean, because most of the Republicans don't believe in controlling big business for the sake of the national interest. It's just not a part of their orthodoxy. So things are not going to get better with them. There needs to be an entirely new political force that has to come to the fore in this country. I know this is, people will say, well, it's not possible. Well, it might not be possible in the immediate future. But in order for this country to survive, we need a bit of a reset in this country. We need a paradigm shift to some degree. You know, if something is not working, you change things around. You know, for example, if I'm eating McDonald's hamburgers, yeah, it tastes great, but in the end, it's going to kill you. And do you want to do things that kill you? No, you change your ways. And change is hard to deal with. I get it. But most of the people, I think, will embrace it as their lives improve. People that are not going to like it are the stateless elements of the billionaire and multimillionaire class of globalists and reactionary labor haters who, you know, don't like socialism because their taxes are raised, but have no problem clinking glasses with socialist dictators and cutting trade deals with collectivist totalitarian dictators. So frankly, I really don't care what they think. I mean, the sad thing is really I'm trying to shore up the system of private property, you know, by trying to maintain the American Republic and the system of private property and private enterprise. It just needs constraints. I mean, Karl Marx correctly talked about how unrestrained capitalism or the bourgeoisie are their own gravediggers, and it's true. Not that I like Karl Marx. I don't like his solutions, as he puts forth at the end of the Communist Manifesto. He has actual list of programs, which is highly authoritarian, which for the most part, we on the show frown upon and are totally against. Alrighty, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this stream right now. And we're going to continue in the future to have some other streams where I want to pop on, talk about some of the news items and talk about the State of the Union address. State of the Union was just, as I said, for those of you who are logging on, summary of the State of the Union was a lot of blah, blah, blah. false populist promises that are generally not delivered. And Biden, yeah, he wants to talk tough against Russia and taking some tough measures, which I support in the case of banning of imports of Russian oil and gas. But he needs to do more. He needs to focus in on rebuilding our nuclear offensive and defensive nuclear deterrent, and also our strategic nuclear forces, making sure that they're modernized, as well as expanding our Navy, and also improving our domestic security, and really using the bully pulpit and policies to win hearts and minds of young Americans back into embracing the United States and the system of private property and private enterprise. That's what Biden needs to do in a nutshell. Biden has talked about again, for those of you who are logging on, relying on Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Iran for imports of oil. Disaster. That's just going to shore up serial human rights violators and allies of Russia, solidify Russian beachheads in Latin America and the Middle East. So, disaster. Biden stinks. Republicans are not going to be much better, unfortunately, for the most part. Time for new leadership. Time for a radical restructuring of campaign finance and lobbying laws. So finally, average people, policemen, policewomen, teachers, librarians, small business people, janitors, housewives, average people who are self-educated or college educated, or they don't have formal education, but they follow the news. They might not have that piece of paper, that diploma on the wall, but they might be politically engaged or self-educated and have good street smarts and good instincts and have love of country in their heart. Those are the average people that need to come to the fore into all levels of the American government. So I'll close with that. I want to thank you all for listening. Thank you for the likes on the program here. I'm going to be holding more of these live streams. God bless America. Stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.